My name is David, and if you told me 6 months ago that my seemingly perfect marriage would crumble like this, I'd have called you insane. Claire, my wife of 12 years, was everything to me. She had this magnetic charm, an effortless beauty, and a laugh that could light up the room. We had 2 kids, our world. Yet here I am, standing on the precipice of discovering a betrayal so profound it would haunt me forever. Claire worked in marketing and often traveled for work. Her job wasn't anything new, she'd been with the firm since before we got married. Over time, I'd gotten used to her business trips, the late-night meetings, and the occasional networking events. I trusted her implicitly, until recently. It started with small things. A change in her demeanor, a certain coldness in our conversations, and a distance I couldn't quite explain. I chalked it up to stress from work, or maybe even the kids keeping her too occupied. But then there were the subtle excuses. Why she couldn't make it home for dinner, why she needed extra time in the office, or why her phone was suddenly glued to her hand like never before. The first red flag came on a Thursday morning. I was going through some bills when I noticed a charge on her personal credit card, a jewelry store in town. Claire had always been frugal, so this purchase caught my attention. My mind reeled. Was it a surprise gift for me? But no gift ever arrived. I didn't want to seem paranoid, so I said nothing. 2 weeks later, Claire mentioned she'd lost her purse on a business trip. It seemed like a minor annoyance at the time, but the timing felt odd. She didn't seem upset, just indifferent, which wasn't like her. It nagged at me, but I dismissed it as overthinking. Until her phone buzzed late one night with a message she scrambled to hide. That's when my suspicions began to spiral. I couldn't shake the gut feeling that something was wrong. She'd always been transparent about her work trips, but now her explanations felt rehearsed. Her recent one to Chicago stood out. She claimed she was meeting a new client but returned with an unusual glow, a spark I hadn't seen in years. Was it joy from a job well done? Or something else entirely? I didn't have answers, but I was determined to find them. For the first time in our marriage, I decided to dig deeper. I started small, keeping track of her stories, asking subtle questions, watching her body language. And while I wasn't proud of it, I began checking her phone whenever she left it unattended. There wasn't much to find. If Claire was hiding something, she was good at it. The moment of no return came one Friday night. I was cleaning out the car when I found an unfamiliar receipt tucked under the passenger seat, a charge from a downtown hotel. A suite. The date matched one of her supposed networking dinners. My hands trembled as I stared at it, a sickness roiling in my gut. That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Instead, I poured a stiff drink and sat in the dark, questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife. Was I just being paranoid? Was this a misunderstanding? Or was my worst fear about to become reality? By the time I went to bed, Claire was already asleep, her face serene, as if nothing could ever disturb her world. I envied her peace. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, knowing deep down that something was terribly wrong. And that soon the truth would come to light, whether I was ready for it or not. The weekend passed like a slow, suffocating fog. Claire acted completely normal, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. We went through our usual routines, breakfast with the kids, grocery shopping, and even a quiet Sunday night watching Netflix. She laughed at the show we were watching, her head resting on my shoulder as if everything was fine. It felt like a cruel joke, one I wasn't in on. Monday morning, I decided I couldn't live in limbo any longer. I needed answers. After Claire left for work, I began my search for clarity. First, I opened her laptop. She rarely used it at home, but when she did, it was usually to catch up on work. I guessed her password on the second try, our eldest son's birthday. There wasn't much. Her browser history had been wiped clean, which struck me as odd. Most people didn't go out of their way to clear their history unless they had something to hide. I checked her email next, but it was all professional correspondence, nothing personal. The lack of evidence only made my paranoia grow. That's when I remembered her phone. Claire always kept it on her, but there were moments, when she showered or slept, that it wasn't within arm's reach. I had to wait for my opportunity, so I bided my time. Later that evening, while Claire was in the shower, I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. My heart pounded as I swiped it open. She didn't bother locking it. I scrolled through her text messages and call logs, hoping to find something, anything. It was clean. Too clean. No personal messages beyond a few from me and her coworkers. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then I noticed an app one hadn't seen before, a messaging app called CloakChat. I opened it, but it required a password. That was my first concrete clue that something was wrong. Claire never used messaging apps beyond the usual ones like iMessage or WhatsApp. What was she hiding? My gut told me this was it. This app was the key to everything. I just didn't know how to crack it. The next day, I reached out to my friend James. He was a tech wizard, someone I knew could help me figure out what Claire was hiding. I told him about the app, and he promised to look into it. Meanwhile, I decided to follow her. It wasn't easy. Claire was meticulous about her schedule, and she always left the house with purpose. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was slipping away, that there was another life she was living beyond the one we shared. Wednesday came, and I finally got the break I was waiting for. James called me with an update on the app. It's designed to erase messages automatically after they're read, he explained. There's no way to recover them unless you catch them in real time. But there's something else. This app is linked to a GPS function. If you log into her account, you can track her location. My stomach turned at the thought of spying on Claire like this. It felt wrong, invasive. But then I remembered the hotel receipt and her distant behavior. Whatever guilt I had about crossing this line evaporated. That evening, while Claire was busy with dinner, I grabbed her phone again and installed a tracking app that would sync with the GPS and CloakChat. If she went anywhere suspicious, I'd know. The next morning, Claire kissed me goodbye as usual and left for work. I waited until her car pulled out of the driveway before checking the tracker. At first, everything seemed fine. She was heading toward her office downtown. But around noon, her location shifted. She wasn't at her office anymore. Instead, the tracker showed her in the parking lot of a local cafe. I decided to check it out myself. Parking a block away, I walked to the cafe, heart pounding. Through the large windows, I scanned the tables. It didn't take long to find her. Claire was sitting with someone, a man. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and an easy smile. I couldn't see much else from my angle, but what I did see made my blood run cold. They were sitting too close. Laughing too easily. Claire leaned in as if hanging on his every word. And then, she touched his hand. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My first instinct was to storm in, to confront them right there. But I held back. If I lost my temper now, I'd never get the truth. Instead, I snapped a picture with my phone and left before I was noticed. At home, I stared at the photo, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was this just a harmless meeting between colleagues? Or was it something more? I didn't have to wonder for long. That night, while Claire slept, I checked the GPS again. Her location history told me everything I needed to know. The cafe wasn't the only place she'd visited. The tracker showed her spending over an hour at a small boutique hotel on the other side of town. There was no more denying it. Claire was cheating on me. Discovering Claire's affair didn't feel like the closure I thought it would. Instead, it cracked my world wide open. My mind spiraled with questions. Who was the man at the cafe? How long had this been going on? And perhaps most haunting of all, why? I didn't confront her immediately. I knew I needed more than a single photograph and a location history to truly understand what was happening, and to prepare for what came next. This wasn't just about satisfying my curiosity. If I decided to end our marriage, I needed proof. The next morning, Claire acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed while packing the kids' lunches, kissed me on the cheek, and headed out the door as usual. I watched her leave, wondering how someone who shared my bed, my life, and my children could live such a convincing lie. I spent the rest of the day strategizing. I called James again, this time for advice on how to track her more effectively. You need to monitor her communication, he said bluntly. She's likely using that app to coordinate everything with him. You'll also want to consider surveillance, audio, video, whatever you're comfortable with. Uncomfortable didn't even begin to describe it. Installing cameras in my own home felt invasive, almost wrong. But I told myself it wasn't our home I was surveilling. It was the battlefield where Claire was waging her deceit. That evening, while Claire showered, I set to work. I installed a small voice recorder under the driver's seat of her car, tucking it out of sight. Then I hid a second recorder in the lining of her favorite purse, the one she always took to work. My last move was placing a discreet camera in our bedroom, positioned to capture anyone who entered. As I worked, my hands shook. I wasn't just gathering evidence, I was unraveling the life we built together. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. I pretended everything was normal, even as I secretly monitored Claire's every move. She didn't notice a thing. But then again, she probably assumed I trusted her completely. On Friday, the first clues surfaced. Reviewing the audio from her car, I heard a short phone conversation that confirmed my worst fears. "Hey," she said, her voice softer, sweeter than I'd heard in years. "Hey yourself," a man's voice replied. "You ready for tomorrow?" "Of course," she said, a giggle breaking through her words. "I can't wait." "Same place as usual?" "Same place," he confirmed. I paused the recording, my heart pounding. Tomorrow meant Saturday. And the same place as usual. It wasn't hard to guess where that might be. The GPS tracker provided the answer. Claire had visited a boutique hotel downtown twice in the past 2 weeks. That had to be where they were meeting. I decided I had to see it for myself. Saturday morning came, and Claire was unusually chipper. She made pancakes for the kids, laughing and joking like the perfect wife and mother. Around 11 a.m., she told me she had errands to run and might be gone for a few hours. I nodded, playing the clueless husband, and watched as she drove away. The tracker on her phone showed her heading toward the city. I grabbed my jacket and followed, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't notice me. Sure enough, the tracker led me to the boutique hotel. I parked a block away and waited. After about 10 minutes, I saw her. Claire stepped out of her car, her face lighting up as a man approached her. It was the same man from the cafe. He kissed her on the cheek, and they walked into the hotel together, hand in hand. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Seeing it with my own eyes was worse than I'd imagined. I didn't want to confront them, not yet. I wanted something irrefutable. So I waited. 45 minutes later, they emerged. Claire's hair was slightly tousled, her makeup smudged. The man looked equally disheveled. They shared a lingering kiss before parting ways, each heading back to their cars. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was undeniable proof. That evening, while Claire sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I locked myself in the office and reviewed the footage from the bedroom camera. I didn't expect to find much, after all, Claire rarely brought anyone home. But what I found shook me to my core. The camera captured Claire standing by the window, talking on her second phone, the one she thought I didn't know about. "It was amazing today," she said, her voice low and sultry. "You always know how to make me feel special." A pause. Then she laughed. "Don't worry about him. He has no idea. David trusts me completely." My blood boiled as I listened. She wasn't just lying to me, she was mocking me, using my trust as a shield for her betrayal. I saved the footage and turned off the computer. For the first time, I felt ready to confront her. That night, Claire came to bed as usual, curling up beside me like nothing had happened. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. How do you confront someone who's been living a double life? I decided I wouldn't confront her, not yet. I needed a plan. By the time the sun rose, I had my answer. I wouldn't just catch Claire in her lies. I'd expose them for everyone to see. Sunday morning felt like the calm before a storm. Claire moved through the house with her usual grace, humming to herself as she poured coffee. Our kids were busy with their own activities, oblivious to the tension building in my chest. I sat at the kitchen table, feigning a casual demeanor. My mind was miles away, calculating the steps I needed to take. Last night, I decided to push forward with my plan. I wasn't just going to confront Claire, I was going to make her face the full weight of her betrayal. But I needed to time it perfectly. Claire mentioned another, late meeting, on Monday evening. That was the opportunity I'd been waiting for. If I played my cards right, I'd catch her in the act. I spent the rest of Sunday in the office, gathering every piece of evidence I'd collected, the audio recordings from her car and purse, the footage from the bedroom camera, and the photos from the hotel. I organized it into a folder on my computer, labeling it "The Truth." Then I made a backup. I wasn't taking any chances. If things got ugly, and I had no doubt they would, I wanted everything on record. By Monday morning I was ready. Claire kissed me goodbye as she left for work, the same way she had every morning for the past 12 years. It felt hollow now, a charade I could no longer endure. After she left, I made 2 critical phone calls. The first was to a private investigator I'd hired last week. I needed someone to follow her that evening, to ensure I didn't miss anything. The second call was to Claire's best friend, Lisa. Lisa and Claire had been inseparable for years. They told each other everything, or so Lisa thought. If there was one person who would be devastated by Claire's betrayal, aside from me, it was Lisa. "Hey, Lisa," I said, keeping my tone light. "Can you swing by tonight? I need to talk to you about something important." Lisa hesitated. "Is everything okay, David? You sound off." "Everything's fine," I lied. "I just need your advice on something." "Around 7 o'clock? "Sure," she agreed, though her voice was laced with concern. As the day dragged on, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. By 6 p.m., Claire had already texted me to say she'd be working late. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji, my heart pounding. By 6:45, Lisa arrived. She brought a bottle of wine, as if sensing that whatever I had to say would require alcohol. "David, what's going on?" she asked the moment she stepped inside. I led her to the living room and handed her the folder labeled "The Truth." "Before I explain," I said, "you need to see this." Lisa opened the folder, her eyes scanning the photos and transcripts. At first, her expression was one of confusion, but as realization set in, her face twisted into horror. "Is this?" she whispered, looking up at me. "Yes," I said. "Claire has been cheating on me." Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. I don't even know what to say." "How long?" "Long enough," I replied bitterly. She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "David, I had no idea. I swear if I'd known." "I believe you," I said, cutting her off. "But I need your help." By 8 p.m., everything was in place. The private investigator texted me, confirming that Claire was indeed at the hotel. I thanked him and told him to stand by. At 8:15, Claire's car pulled into the driveway. I stood by the living room window, watching as she stepped out, her hair slightly messy and her lipstick smudged. Lisa sat silently on the couch, her face pale. Claire walked through the front door, smiling as if nothing was amiss. "Hey, hon," she said, dropping her purse on the counter. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" Lisa didn't respond. She just stared at Claire, her expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. Claire's smile faltered. "What's going on?" "Sit down," I said, my voice calm but firm. She hesitated. "David, what?" I said, "Sit down." The authority in my voice must have startled her because she obeyed. I picked up the folder and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of her. "Care to explain this?" Claire's eyes widened as she flipped through the contents. Her face drained of color, and she looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I I can explain, she stammered. Don't bother, I said, cutting her off. I know everything. The cafe, the hotel, the app. You've been lying to me for months, Claire. She turned to Lisa, as if searching for support. Lisa, I don't, Lisa snapped, her voice trembling with anger. How could you do this, Claire? To David? To your family? Claire's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. This isn't what it looks like, she began, but I stopped her again. Don't insult me by lying, Claire. I followed you. I saw you with him. She looked down, her hands trembling. I made a mistake, she whispered. No, I said coldly. You made a choice. And now you're going to face the consequences. I handed her a USB drive containing all the evidence. Take this. Give it to your lawyer. Because you're going to need one. Claire's head snapped up, her face a mixture of shock and desperation. David, please. I'm done, Claire, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. We're done. Lisa stood, tears streaming down her face. You're not the person I thought you were, she said, her voice shaking. Then she walked out, slamming the door behind her. Claire sat frozen, staring at me as if waiting for me to take it all back. But I didn't. I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her lies. I spent that night alone in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. Downstairs, I could hear Claire pacing back and forth, occasionally sobbing. It wasn't the kind of crying that stirs sympathy. It was the sound of someone mourning the loss of control over a situation they thought they'd mastered. The kids were thankfully asleep through all of this. That was my one solace. Their world hadn't shattered just yet. But I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down on all of us. When I woke up the next morning, I was met with silence. No smell of coffee brewing. No kids arguing over cereal. Just silence. For a moment, I thought Claire might have left, packed her things and fled in the night. But when I walked downstairs, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. She looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. David, we need to talk. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. No, you don't understand, she insisted, her voice cracking. I know I messed up, but it's not what you think. It was never about you. I laughed bitterly. Not about me? That's your excuse? You lied to me, to our kids, and you threw away everything we built. But sure, Claire, tell me how it's not about me. She stood up, wringing her hands. I didn't plan for this to happen. It happened. I was feeling lost, and he was there. He made me feel. Don't you dare say he made you feel something I couldn't. I snapped, my voice rising. You had a choice, Claire. You chose this. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might try to fight back. But instead, she broke down again, sinking back into her chair. I don't want to lose you, she whispered. I felt a pang of something, sadness? Anger? Pity, but I buried it quickly. You already have. The hardest part was telling the kids. I had to explain why their mom and dad weren't going to live under the same roof anymore, without destroying their image of her entirely. I didn't want to weaponize them against her, as much as I hated her in that moment. That evening, we sat them down in the living room. Claire kept fidgeting, avoiding their eyes, while I tried to keep my voice steady. Mom and I have decided that it's best for us to take some time apart, I began. Jeremy, our oldest, narrowed his eyes. What do you mean, apart? I hesitated. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. It means we're separating, at least for now. But we both love you very much, and that's never going to change. The kids looked confused, then hurt. Melissa, our youngest, started crying, and Claire tried to comfort her. But Melissa pulled away, clinging to me instead. Why? Jeremy asked, his voice sharp. What happened? It's complicated, I said. But just know that none of this is your fault. We're going to figure out a way to make this work as a family, even if things are different. Jeremy didn't look convinced. He glanced at Claire, his expression hard. What did you do? Claire's face crumbled, but I jumped in before she could answer. Jeremy, this isn't about blame. It's about making sure we're all okay moving forward. He didn't respond, but the look he gave her told me he wasn't buying it. Over the next few days, I met with my lawyer to initiate the divorce process. Claire didn't fight me on much. She knew she didn't have the moral high ground. We already had a prenup, which worked in my favor. It stipulated that any infidelity would result in a significant reduction of her claim to our joint assets. She tried to negotiate for the house, citing the kids, but I stood firm. The house had been in my family for generations, and I wasn't about to let her take it. Instead, I offered to help her find a rental nearby, so she could stay close to the kids. To my surprise, she agreed without much of a fight. Maybe guilt was finally catching up to her. Word spread quickly. In a town like ours, secrets don't stay secret for long. Lisa, who had been a pillar of support for me, couldn't keep quiet. She told her husband, who told someone else, and before long, everyone knew what Claire had done. Some of our mutual friends distanced themselves from her completely, choosing to side with me. Others stayed neutral, but the tension was palpable. Claire's lover wasn't so lucky. His wife found out about the affair and kicked him out, filing for divorce the same week I did. The fallout was messy, and I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of satisfaction. By the time Claire moved out, the house felt empty. The kids stayed with me during the week and went to her place on weekends, but the silence in the evenings was deafening. I tried to focus on rebuilding, spending more time with the kids, throwing myself into work, reconnecting with friends. But there were nights when the loneliness crept in, when I couldn't help but think about what we'd lost. One evening, as I sat on the couch flipping through old family photos, I felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. I'd loved Claire deeply, and for a long time, I thought she'd loved me too. But now, I wasn't sure if that love had ever been real, or if I'd just been blind to the truth all along. One thing was certain, the life I thought we had was gone. And there was no going back. The days after Claire moved out were a strange mix of relief and grief. The house was quieter than it had ever been, but it also felt like a battlefield that I'd survived. Everything, the photos on the walls, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the bedroom, was a reminder of what we'd lost. The kids were struggling too, though they tried to hide it. Jeremy had taken to locking himself in his room for hours, blasting music so loud I could hear it through the walls. Melissa was clingier than ever, following me around the house like a shadow. I did my best to keep things normal for them. I cooked their favorite meals, helped with homework, and even started taking them on weekend outings, trips to the park, the movies, anywhere to distract them from the tension that had settled over our family. About a week after Claire moved out, she called me. I wasn't planning to answer, but something about seeing her name on the screen made me pause. Against my better judgment, I picked up. David, she began, her voice soft. I need to talk to you. I think we've said everything there is to say, I replied, my tone cold. Please, she pleaded. I owe you an explanation. I need you to hear me out. I sighed, leaning back against the counter. Fine. Say what you need to say. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I regret what I did. I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. Her words might have meant something if they'd come sooner. But now, they felt hollow, too little, too late. I trusted you, Claire, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I built my life around you, and you threw it all away. Do you even understand what you've done to our family? I do, she said, her voice breaking. And I hate myself for it. But it wasn't about you, David. It was about me, about feeling trapped, like I'd lost who I was outside of being a wife and a mother. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. So your solution was to cheat? To blow up everything we had? I know it sounds ridiculous, she admitted. But I was unhappy. And instead of talking to you, I made the worst mistake of my life. I was silent for a long moment, letting her words hang in the air. Finally I said, "You're right about one thing, you made your choice. And now we all have to live with it." The hardest part of the separation wasn't dealing with Claire, it was dealing with the kids. They were too young to understand the full truth, but old enough to sense that something was deeply wrong. "Dad," Jeremy said one night, his voice hesitant, "are you and Mom ever getting back together?" I froze, unsure how to respond. "I don't know, buddy," I said finally. "But no matter what happens, we both love you and Melissa more than anything." He frowned, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. "Did she do something wrong?" I wanted to protect him from the ugliness of the truth, but I also didn't want to lie. "Sometimes adults make mistakes," I said carefully. "Big ones. And those mistakes can change things forever." Jeremy looked down at his hands, his expression guarded. "She hurt you, didn't she?" I didn't answer, but the look in my eyes must have said enough. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but little by little, I began to carve out a new routine. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to fill the empty hours. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd drifted away from during my years with Claire. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I started focusing on myself, on what I wanted, rather than what I'd lost. The kids, too, were beginning to adjust. Melissa started drawing pictures of our new family, just the three of us, with bright smiles on all our faces. Jeremy, though still quiet, started opening up to me in small ways, asking for help with school projects, inviting me to play video games with him. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Claire, meanwhile, kept trying to mend things in her own way. She showed up at Jeremy's soccer games, sent me updates about school events, and even suggested family therapy. I agreed to therapy, not for her, but for the kids. They deserved the chance to work through their feelings in a safe space, and if Claire was serious about making amends, this was the least she could do. But as for our relationship? That bridge had been burned. One evening, months after Claire's affair came to light, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Melissa was inside drawing, and Jeremy was playing basketball in the driveway. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was moving forward. And while the scars of Claire's betrayal would always be there, they no longer felt like open wounds. If nothing else, this experience had taught me one thing: I was stronger than I ever realized. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, I knew I could face them. Because now, I wasn't just living for the past. I was living for the future.